If you've ever wondered whether you're neurodivergent or just felt like you see the world a little differently, you're not alone. I was diagnosed autistic at 25, and suddenly, so many things I never had words for started to make sense. Here, I share the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful parts of life through an autistic lens. My name is Elena Carroll, and if you're looking for answers, understanding, or just an autistic friend, you're in the right place. The concept of money. Maybe you have clicked on this video and you feel just a little bit of anxiety around the topic. Maybe there is this residual feeling inside of you around, the shame that can often come with money. Why is money, the concept of money, managing money, so hard for autistic people? That's what I'm going to be getting into today. I think for a lot of autistic people, money isn't just something that is stressful, but it often can feel like a really, really impossible puzzle to try and figure out. And it plays such a pivotal role in independence and becoming an adult. I don't think that it's necessarily that we're bad with money. It's more so, I think, the way in which the world teaches us about money. The way the world talks about it and manages money oftentimes just doesn't work for our brains. And I'm going to be kind of going into this a little bit more about why you might be in a place where, you don't necessarily want to be. Maybe you're not as independent as you would like to be at this current point in your life. I know that society can place a lot of blame and guilt on an individual if they are not up to, the neurotypical milestones. Then if the person isn't reaching the same milestones as everyone else, then we can feel like there is something wrong with us. And I guess that's the whole point of this channel and the work that I do, is to remind autistic and neurodivergent people that just because they do things differently doesn't mean that it's wrong. In order to keep this conversation as open and as vulnerable as I can, I always like to kind of start off my videos with kind of talking about my experiences. In this case, money has been probably my weakest point in my adult life, my independent life. I have been incredibly embarrassed to kind of talk about this with people in my life, but I think that in order to bring about change, you have to accept what is, and you have to kind of let things go, let the past be the past, and learn to kind of accept yourself and the decisions that you made, because if you knew better, you would have done better. And I'm only learning now at 29 how to be an adult. For a little bit of backstory on myself, I went to university to study psychology. I never actually ended up completing that degree for a variety of reasons, but the main one being that I was in a very toxic and abusive relationship. I was living with this person and I feared for my life and I feared for my mental health, and basically felt that it was better for my future for me to drop out of university. Oh, hello. And so with that comes a lot of student loan debt. And it was around this time that my YouTube channel, my social media work started picking up. So for those of you who don't know, I have had a very long career on social media. I have done social media for 12 years now. It hasn't been, a job for all of that time, but for a lot of it, in my early 20s, I was able to kind of support myself through what I was doing on social media at the time. Within that time period, I was earning more than what most people my age were. And so I kind of thought I hit the lottery of winning at life. I believed that this was something that I was going to be doing for the rest of my life, and why would the money run out? Again, very naive thinking. And so I spent like it wasn't going to run out. It was the first time in my life that I'd ever experienced this kind of financial freedom. I mean, not many people have financial freedom in their early 20s. And I was very, very privileged in what I was doing. But at the same time, I was not interested when anyone kind of talked to me about like saving for my future or investing or putting money aside for taxes and bills and things like that. I just kind of thought those are future thoughts. I will deal with them later on down the road. Of course, the story ends where the money did run out, of course, and I had a lot of bills to pay, and that's kind of where I'm at now in my life. I think that there is a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, because when I tell people, like close people in my life, like how much money I made and where I'm at today, they're like, where did it all go? And it was spent through excitement and naivety. I suppose I just share that, not so much to like gain advice or pity or anything like that. I share that to say, like, if you are in a place that you don't necessarily want to be and you're not really proud of telling people in your life about, just know that you're not alone. You might look at someone and they look like they have it all, and I certainly did, but it's not the case, and it might not always be the case. The fact of the matter is, I think that regardless of your education around money, regardless of where you are at in life and all the advantages and disadvantages against you, the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, neurodivergent people are at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to money and being ahead in life. And I think that comes through a variety of reasons. Of course, if you were surrounded by adults who prioritized money for their own future, they are aware of all the concepts of money, they are aware of the importance of investments and saving, and they are kind of money savvy, then that means that education might have rubbed off on you and been instilled in you. And I think that, of course, that is a privilege whether you are neurodivergent or not. I think for a lot of autistic people, it wasn't so much focusing on, building their future and looking toward the future, because sometimes the success of the week might have just been getting through the week without a meltdown. You're not necessarily focusing on investments and saving for the future if you don't even believe that there is a future to be had. And I think that definitely was a mindset that I carried, is what does it matter if I'm spending my money, because I have been so unhappy my entire life and I don't even know if I'm going to be here, and that's kind of the way that I thought. If you grew up in survivalist households where the goal was just to survive, then you may not have been given that education from any adults that you were around. Of course, I think that a big part of money is the emotional side that comes along with it, and that is the stress that comes with managing money. Opening up bills, checking your bank account can leave you with this sense of dread of what's coming, what you are having to deal with. There can also be this fear of like phone calls and having to actually confront the issue, because the reality is the emotional truth of money is it brings a lot of guilt and it brings a lot of shame, and it can sometimes be easier to not confront the issues that are pressing to avoid the cycle and the spiral that shame and guilt can bring. Of course, I am no stranger to mental health, poor mental health, anxiety, and depression. I'm sure that there are many of you that also relate to this, and this can also play a really big part into the emotional side. If you are depressed, of course, like you are just focusing on showering for that day or eating 3 meals a day. You are not thinking about what bills are needing to be paid because you're at capacity. On top of that, I think that there are obviously co-occurring conditions with autism, particularly executive dysfunction, and being able to maintain paying bills on time, staying ahead, thinking about multiple different tasks that are needing to be completed. And so, that can get away from us. And of course, the anxiety around, what's going to happen if you don't have enough money, and, you can spiral down that rabbit hole very, very easily. Something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about within the autism world is how money is an abstract, right? It is not necessarily something that you are seeing unless you have like wads of cash and are a drug dealer, which if that's the case, like, good for you. I'm sure that helps with, being able to visualize your money a lot easier. But for a lot of us, we do not have access to seeing our money. It's more or less just numbers on a screen or bills that are coming in and how much we're owing, right? And it's oftentimes very much future-based thinking. So being able to think for your future, what if the rent increases? All of these things are not concrete terms. They are very much what ifs. And that can be really hard for autistic people to kind of grasp intangible ideas and concepts, which can make it really hard to save and predict potential outcomes. If you can't see the rent increase in front of you, it doesn't always register until it actually happens for a lot of people. And, this is when I would tune out. I had an uncle of mine, which, God bless him, he was doing the best he could with me, but I was just so disinterested. And I was very, very young. Like, I was within my teenage years, and he started talking to me about retirement and the importance of retirement and like saving for that and how much easier it would make my life one day. And I thought, like, I'm just trying to get through my day. Like, who knows if I'm even going to be at that point. And while I think both things can be true, future-based thinking is very important, but also staying in the moment, living in the moment, not getting too anxious and worked up about the what ifs, I think is also important. But I very much stayed true to the belief that I'll deal with that one day. That is Elena's, the future Elena's stress. It's not my stress now. Finally, I would say that the system is honestly not built for us. If we are having to talk to banks, most of the time that looks like having phone calls with banks and having to stay on the line. And, a lot of the time, if it's not written down, we can't really grasp what they're saying. If we are having like in-person conversations or meetings, most of the time that's very rushed, and we can honestly be masking just to get through the meeting as best we can, trying to look as self-sufficient and independent. So I always try and, with every bit of content that I make online, I always try and offer like really realistic ways that we can actually kind of improve these areas of our lives. Because it's one thing to like read a self-help book about money. And while I think that could be incredibly helpful as a starting point to kind of introduce your mind to these concepts and this way of thinking, if you weren't introduced to that when you were younger, I also think that these books don't take into account neurodivergence. We can kind of beat ourselves up for not kind of following what the book is kind of telling us. So these realistic tips that I'm giving you are from a neurodivergent person's perspective on ways to introduce yourself to these concepts and bringing down the anxiety that you might feel around money. The first point that I would suggest is start with small chunks. I think if you lay out the topic of money, there are so many little dimensions to that word, and we can get lost in the jargon of money talk. But I think if you start in very, very small chunks, like what investments mean, what a savings account is, how interest works, educating yourself in just these small areas can be kind of an easier way, a more palatable way of, introducing yourself to this big scary topic. On top of that, I really suggest, setting short amount of time doing this. So 10 to 15 minutes at a time can really be enough time to, not bombard your brain with information. It can be really overwhelming, particularly if you carry a lot of shame. But there isn't this pressure to kind of do everything and learn everything at once, which we can often do. We can put that pressure on ourselves very easily. Use visual tools when you are doing this. So I am such a big believer of how colors and new stationery can actually excite us to want to sit down and actually tackle big, heavy tasks. It doesn't have to be just money, it can be anything. But, using colors, I think, can make our brains register to what information we're actually seeing and be able to recognize it a little bit more. Visualizing income versus expenses in different colors can kind of take away the thing that I was talking about before, which is money is an abstract, and it can kind of seem a little bit more tangible with the colors. I'm such a big believer in scripts and checklists for my life and everyday life, and so I think that this can be a really helpful thing for people who are learning how to pay bills, learning how to call the bank, learning how to pay taxes. Writing a script on how to actually do that can be a really helpful thing, and putting it all into a folder so that when you need to do it for the next time, you're not scrambling, how did I do this last time, or how is it actually done? It's all kind of there, ready for you. Learning in your preferred format. So for me, I definitely do not learn through people kind of sitting down and teaching me, kind of like how school was. I definitely love books. I also love visuals. And so, choose what works for you. There is so much information out there, particularly when it comes to money, whether that be books, whether that be YouTube videos, whether that be podcasts or lectures. There is so much out there and so many tools, particularly on Pinterest. Like, people kind of put up these little diagrams of like all these different tools that you can use. So there is a wealth of knowledge out there if you are kind of struggling and don't have someone in your corner in your real life to kind of help educate you. If you are in a position where you can actually go and talk to someone who does manage their own finances, I think peer support can be a really helpful thing. Getting them to break down the terms and the things that you're struggling with can be incredibly helpful, particularly over like a bank or a financial advisor. I think those can be a little bit more intimidating for neurodivergent people. I know myself, I just tend to go in and mask, whereas like with a friend or parent, I would kind of feel like I can be more myself. Finding safe spaces to ask basic questions. So I know that this may not be applicable to everybody's situation, but if possible, I thought I would put the idea out there. I think that there are autism workshops within communities that kind of try and teach the basic principles of money. There are support workers and even like the online community. I give different talks around autism every week, which you guys have maybe heard me talk about in the past, on the platform Sharewell, and that is basically a community where me and people from all around the world talk about our experiences with autism, and it's like a little community group. Maybe it could be really impactful to find an online community where you are able to ask the basic questions. Even Reddit is also a really positive place for asking the questions that you want answered. People from all walks of life can answer back to you. Finally, I want to end on a little bit of a positive note, a more optimistic note, and that is normalizing that mistakes are a part of the process. You can't learn all that you can learn about money overnight. It is a process, particularly if it doesn't come natural to you, particularly if there's a lot of anxiety, shame, and guilt attached to this topic for you. It's something that, is going to be a process, like different areas of our life, our self-concept, our friendships, our jobs, our family life, all these different areas we can hold different beliefs around. And money, I think, is another aspect. Whether we believe it comes easily to us or whether we believe we have to work really hard to get it, all of these are individual and personal beliefs. So please just go easy with yourself. You're doing the best you can. The fact that you're on this video shows that you have an interest in kind of learning more, and that's such a powerful thing. It's a very scary thing for me to be talking about this topic because, as I said in the beginning, there's a lot of shame and guilt attached to this for me, but I'm taking the first step, trying to take control of that shame and guilt and not let it define me. I know now that my mistakes with with spending all my savings were lessons that were going to kind of help me within the work that I'm doing within the autism community and be able to relate to more people. And so that'll be the same for you. You'll be able to one day give someone else the advice if they are struggling with money. So I hope that leaves you with a little bit of knowledge to think about. Let me know your thoughts on this video. If you guys would like to see any more content from me, my social medias are always linked down below. Thank you guys so much for all the support. It means the world to me, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Bye.